Well, howdy, folks. Just wanted to give you a big Texas welcome to the Working Musicians Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Dris Organica. I would like to thank Miller High Life and apparently Corona. Is that what's in there? It's a Corona Light. Yes. Lighten it up for this episode. So today I'm going to be talking about creativity and doing whatever it takes to be more creative in your music, artwork, whatever it is you happen to be doing. But I think the more we really start to think about creativity, the more that really goes into it beyond just some of the obvious things. I'd also like to forewarn you that I have this strange suspicion, kind of knowing the sort of mood I'm in at the moment, that this episode might get a little bit stupid. So, you've been warned. So what do I mean by creativity? Well, let's use songwriting as an example. I think that's a pretty obvious direction to go down when it comes to creativity. So, I think we've all heard a lot of songs that are just very creative, have a lot of interest in it just due to the songwriting aspect. While the performances may be great, maybe not, but the point is, the songs are just very well written. They're very creative, have a lot of interesting stuff going on. And then it seems like there's stuff that just, wow, this is bland. Bland, bland, bland. Throw it in the blender and it all sounds the same. It all comes out the same. Put in the same ingredients, you get the same product, right? I think that really turns people off when they hear just the same thing coming at them all the time. So I think there's a few things we need to take into consideration when it comes to being creative as a songwriter. Because a lot of the stuff, that material that we do, the chord progressions, the overall song format of verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between genres in popular music today, whether it be just flat out pop, rock, hip hop. I mean, realistically, the structure of them aren't always that much different. They generally have a verse, they generally have a chorus, and they usually have some kind of maybe an intro, an outro, or some kind of a bridge or a breakdown or something like that. So, how much room is there really for creativity within this? And I would still say quite a bit. But where I notice one of the big things that people tend to get very creative with, and it's for the better or worse, are with intros. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a track and it's got this really cool intro, and then it goes into the verse and it's like, okay, next. This sucks, right? And it's funny how people seem to be, I'd say more often than not, people tend to be able to write better introductions to their songs than they can actually write a song. So I think that's very odd. It seems like people tend to write music sometimes in the wrong way. Like, not to say there's a 100% right or wrong way to do things. You always hear people go, oh, well, when you write songs, do you start with the music first or do you write the vocals first? And I never really quite understood that. I don't see how you can really write a vocal melody without having the song, but maybe that's just because of the way I look at it. But I think if you're writing a song, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to start with the introduction. That's just one that never seems to work for me. Now I've noticed that, like, as I'm piddling around on the guitar, I find, okay, what kind of a mood am I in? Am I in kind of a funk? Am I in kind of a bad mood? Am I in a really happy mood? A lot of this stuff really depends on the mood you're in, and I think you have to go with it because, I mean, we're only so creative. You'll notice that, generally speaking, an artist tends to write music that kind of fits within a certain box. Now how big that box is varies from one person to the next, but you'll begin to notice that if you start writing songs pretty seriously and do this a lot, you'll notice just how much your mood makes a difference in the style and the music and the chords you pick out and just the overall kind of tone and theme of the music you feel like writing. And half the time it ends up being something that goes nowhere, and you decide, okay, this isn't going anywhere, let's just go ahead and scrap it. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with looking at something that you've been piddling around with for 30 minutes and realizing, okay, there's just not enough here to really move on from. So let's start from the beginning. That's fine. But the ironic thing is, you might notice a few months down the road, there's something that you did in a song that you end up scrapping that ends up working very well, and that maybe you wouldn't have come to that had you not, started writing a song that you eventually end up killing. So I don't think there's any risk of, failing in this. If you write a song and you don't think it's up to snuff, kill it. That's fine. But don't be surprised if you end up using a little progression or a little riff or something out of something that you had previously written and then scrapped. I noticed myself doing this, I wouldn't say all the time, but it's happened enough where, I'm working on something and I just can't really get it to go where I want it to, and it just doesn't work. And then coming to find out, 2 years later, it's like, hold on, I think I had something that I'd scrapped that I think would work very well for what I'm doing now. It's just how that seems to work. And I think the more songs you write, the more often that this kind of a instance will come up. But so let's say that you just got off work, right? You're not in the headspace to write music. Just don't even try. Sometimes it helps to take a little bit of a nap, get refreshed, do whatever you got to do to wind down, drink a beer, have a glass of wine. But something to take into consideration is that, once again, the mood you're in was going to make a huge difference on the kind of music you write. And I've tended to notice that I usually do my best work later in the night, usually after 10 o'clock. And I think the reason for this is, well, I'm not exactly a night owl or an early bird or anything like that. I tend to notice that after I've managed to unwind and kind of reflect upon the day, and, the little ones are sleeping and things are quiet and the atmosphere is just very peaceful and relaxing, I tend to feel more connected, mind, body, and soul, so to speak. Not to get all hippie on you, but I tend to notice that later in the evening, I think most people tend to do better creative work, right? Because the sun's not shining on them. You don't feel like you need to be accomplishing stuff in the house. You've already gotten your morning workout done. You've already cleaned up everything. And this is just you. This is you time. That time that you spend to kind of relax, reflect, can also be utilized, on an instrument or writing or doing mixes. And I think that's where people usually get their best work, because they're not really angry anymore. They're not apprehensive. They don't have that anxiety. And they're not putting as much pressure on themselves because they're relaxed, right? So, but to come back to the kind of mood you're in, if you know that you're in a mood where you're just kind of missing somebody in your life, like there's a family member or friend or loved one that you haven't seen in a while, and you start thinking about them, that's great. Use that. Use that as fuel for your musical fire. If there's something along the lines of where you're very angry with something, whether it be a world issue, something that happened in your personal life or to someone don't be afraid to use that as fuel for the fire, because at the end of the day, music is a series of emotions and feelings tied into waveforms. And I think there's definitely, you can go too far with some of the kind of emo music I've heard, where it just seems like maybe they're trying too hard. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but at the risk of going totally emo, you'll generally find that if you've got a little bit of passion in your mind, and that you're actually having some genuine emotions going on as you're writing music, you tend to come up with better work, because it's like your mind and body are in tune with each other, and you really start feeling what you're playing. And you'll begin to notice that the more accomplished you become on your instrument and the longer you work at songwriting, the more your hands just tend to go where your mind needs them to. It's just you tend to pick out the right chords, as opposed to where if it's 4 p.m. in the afternoon, you've been off work for an hour, it's just not the same. And so if you're in one of those mind spaces, or one of those head spaces to really write something that's very angry, that's fine, go with it. But keep in mind that if you don't have that long of time to work on this, or if you're starting to get tired, you'll notice that very quickly your level of drive tends to go away as you get past something. So I've begun to notice that, I have a tendency to, want to write the verse and the chorus, but in reality, I think when you're the most passionate about something, it's a good time to start writing the most impactful part of the song, right? And so I tend to notice that. I think writing a good chorus or a good hook or a good transition is a very good thing to do more early on, because once you know where the ending of a song is supposed to be, or the chorus, or where the climax is, you just got to run the race to get to that spot, and it's kind of gives you the direction of where to go. So maybe that's something that people should try, is if they haven't done this before, is write the chorus first. Get that down. Get some vocal ideas, right? Play the thing over and over again until you've really got it down. You understand what it's all about. Then start doing some variations. See what happens. See where you can go with it, right? And I think it kind of brings into something that a lot of us struggle with is, okay, you've got your chorus. Let's say you've got an idea for a verse that come before it or after it. But how do you get from point A to point B? How do you get from that verse to chorus, or that chorus back to the verse, or that kind of thing? And that's when we come into the concept of transitions. And this is where I think a lot of people really struggle. Okay, so let's think of this as a transition. How many times have you heard on the radio or someone else's music where the verse is some kind of strumming sort of pattern, kind of light, kind of clean sounds, and then they have to figure out a way to get into the chorus, which is just basically, some lightly syncopated power chords, something lines of dun 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 dun, right? Well, how do you get to that point, And you begin to notice there's a few sort of common themes that come up a lot. And a lot of times it's what I call the dropout, where everything comes to a final resting point, or hits all at once, stops for a beat, and then dun 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 dun, right? I mean, it's almost kind of comical when you realize how many of the transitions, while they may be different, but a lot of them tend to be along a few basic concepts, right? So you've got the drop, the stop and drop to, light to heavy, that kind of a concept, which works in a lot of instances. Then another one I call the Nickelback transition, which they seem to do a lot of, and hey, they're a huge band, it works for them, even though I think it's kind of cheesy. I'd be lying if I said I've never done a Nickelback transition in my day, but that's just kind of like you kind of hold out the last chord of the verse, and you just kind of syncopate it and build it up slowly and dynamic. So you get the dun 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 dun. And that's one I guarantee you've heard quite a few times. But go back, and now that you've heard that, listen to some Nickelback, and I think you'll be like, oh wow, I could, maybe I hadn't noticed this before, but they do this quite a bit. Not bashing Nickelback, even though I think 90% of what they do is garbage. I actually really like some of their music. So, hey, to each their own. But they're definitely a huge band, a huge act, making good money, I hope. So all the more power to them. Just because I don't like something that much doesn't mean it's not good. Just means I don't care for it. And that's okay, because we don't have to like the same things. No problem there. So those are some, just a couple very common transitions I see. But if you kind of go a little bit more deeply into it, you'll begin to notice that really I think what makes a big difference from kind of your amateur sounds to your more professional sounds, obviously, is the songwriting and the composition quality. And within that, the transitions seem to be one of the things that makes something sound more professional versus amateur. And the more seamless and just natural the transitions are, the better. So I've had many times where I seem to be able to come up with a pretty cool chorus in a matter of minutes. Start doodling around with some variations of the chorus, or maybe something that's very opposite, kind of in contrast to the chorus, kind of lighter, whatever. And I come up with, okay, I think this would be a good verse. But then for the life of me, I can't figure out how to get that verse to the chorus. And maybe it's one of those things where you begin to realize, oh, the key's a little bit different, or I'm not playing the same kind of roots of this key signature. And that's where things get sticky. So there's nothing wrong with changing keys or anything like that, or tempo, or heck, you can even change the time signature if you want. There's nothing wrong with that, but it can be very difficult to do that stuff and make it seem natural and seamless. But then there's times where it just makes a lot of sense. I can give you an example of a song that I did where I ended up changing the tempo on. I'm sorry, an example of a song that I did where I ended up changing the key on. And while, being a music theorist is kind of a dream of the past for me, I don't claim to be that music theory minded anymore, but just playing a simple a chord, I basically held, one of the strings. Basically, I just took one of the chords I was playing, and in the verse, I left that string open, and then in the chorus, I basically put one of my fingers on the first fret of that same string. So basically, I changed it from, I changed the key a little bit, going from the verse to the chorus, and I tell you, I had a hard time. It wasn't too hard to get from the verse to the chorus, but then getting from the chorus back to the verse was hard. And I was able to figure out a way. And if y'all are interested, you can go on Reverb Nation and listen to my song "Do You," which is actually one of my more favorite songs. It's also a very kind of an intimate, personal kind of a thing. But I wrote it, I think, broad enough to where I don't think it's going to reveal too much about me. But you'll notice that going from especially from the chorus back down to the verse, you'll notice that the chord is similar, but that the key changes. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, but it definitely makes you focus on how to creatively do that. Because if you're going down a half step on a chord, or you have an accidental on the way down, which something that not everyone realizes is the case, like in certain keys, they are not the same up and down, So when you go up in a da 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 da, that kind of thing, it sounds good going up one way, but when you come back down, you have to usually throw in what they call like an accidental and make something like flat, just by a half step to make it make sense. Because going up, it works one way, but going down, it tends to work another. Don't even try to wrap your head around how that works. There's no point in it. It's just the way things work. But I think being aware that when you go from lower to higher and higher to lower, I think it's a good idea to be aware that your ear just hears things differently, and that sometimes you actually have to change the key a little bit. So instead of, let's say that for one reason going up into the chorus, you do a one, you're on a string and it's a 1-3-5, and then coming back down, you notice for whatever reason, I got to do a 5-4-2 or whatever. You'll begin to notice that as you come back down, you have to change one of those notes, or it just doesn't quite sound right. That's an example of music theory coming into play, where you know that you're having to do something weird, but you don't understand why. And that's fine. Your ear will be your guide on this. But so in addition to changing, the key of the song, sometimes changing the tempo a little bit makes a big difference. Now, when it comes to recording, it can be kind of hard if you add a slight increase in tempo. But little things like speeding up and slowing down really do make a big difference. And I've noticed this a lot in transitions of songs. A lot of times you'll find that the chorus is a little bit quicker or slower than the verse. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great thing. I mean, dynamics are meant to be louder and softer. The time is meant to vary. And if you've got a very musical player, you'll notice that they have a tendency to kind of, let's say it's a four beat. Let's say it's a 4/4 time signature, and it's basically an 8-bar phrasing, meaning that it takes 2 measures to complete a full thought or musical expression or phrase, right? You notice like a good musician will naturally oftentimes kind of speed it up going into the counts 3 and 4 and start slowing it back down come counts 5 and 6. It's just, I don't know why, but it's there's a word for this and I can't remember what it's called. It's in Latin, but it's going back to my high school big band music days when I played trombone. But there is it's a fundamental, and once you kind of realize that it's a good thing to do, there's a lot of times you'll begin to notice you do this naturally. So even though you're still in tempo, you kind of, get a little bit ahead and a little bit behind the beat, just a little bit, just kind of like drummers will sometimes play on the very back of the beat to add a little bit more power, or bass players in particular, I've noticed will sometimes do this, and it just sounds good. Even though it's a fractal of a millisecond behind the beat, it sounds better. So when it comes to being creative, realize that there's a lot of theoretical things that you can do in music, especially when it comes to transitions, that I think really, if somebody really starts mastering songwriting, they begin to realize how important transitions are, and that's really the biggest struggle. I think writing intros are easy. Ending songs is easy. Coming up with a bridge isn't all that hard, or a breakdown. But I tell you what sure is hard is going from verse to chorus, and then sometimes what's even harder is going from chorus to verse, right? So how do you keep things interesting while bringing down the intensity? So if my personal opinion is going from the first chorus to the second verse is oftentimes the hardest transition you make. But go listen to some of your favorite albums and see what kind of things they do conceptually, and see if you can't integrate that in your own style and make it your own. Of course, do your own thing. Don't just rip people off, but it's a good way to kind of learn from others and grow as a songwriter and artist. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, this is about to get a little bit stupid. All right, but I think it kind of has to. So the last half of this episode is going to be about finding inspiration for your creativity. All right, so what do you got to do to fuel that creative spark? I think if you've heard more than one episode of this, you'll kind of notice that I have a tendency to maybe have a little bit to drink before I get behind the mic, kind of loosens me up. Absolutely. And that's fine. That's a personal thing I do. Now, I'd like to think that I'm not so sloppy that I'm just, slurring all over the microphone. I might have the occasional, beer burp, but it's not like I'm back here puking my guts out because I just got shit faced. That's not inspiration for your creativity. But I've come to notice that there are certain things that people tend to do that help make them more creative. And I'm just going to use beer, for example, because where I live in Texas, certain things aren't legal, whereas in other places they are. And you will never, and I don't do drugs. I don't, think that's something that most people should do, or anybody should feel the need to do. But I'm realistic enough to the fact that people enjoy them, and that if there wasn't a demand for them, there wouldn't be a supply and war is being fought. But just, it's not too hard to see how big of a social issue that drugs have become, and the amount of crime that comes as a result, just between just importing and selling and all that stuff, to where I've made it my personal choice to be drug-free. So in case you ever wondered, yes, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm a huge proponent of drinking responsibly, but just want to make sure my stand is I do not smoke marijuana cigarettes. I pass on grass. All right? And while that's fine, that probably puts me somewhere in the minority amongst musicians. Not to say that all musicians, like to toke up before they start playing the old six string, but hey, I've played around, I've seen this enough times to where it's actually kind of strange when you're the one person that doesn't do the weed marijuana thing, or you're or worse. I've seen worse, and there's certain things that don't bother me. Like, I don't know, certain drugs to me are just a little bit more crazy than other ones. But that's fine if you feel like, hey, you're a little bit more inspired. That's great, but just realize that what you think sounds good in your mind when they are being, let's just say, enhanced by mind-altering substances, once you hear that played back when you're not in an enhanced mind position, sometimes you begin to realize how stupid it really is. Not to say that there's anything wrong with, doing a little something that you got to do. Let's just say having a couple beers and playing the guitar. Oh, that's super fun. That's relaxing. And I can see how somebody who maybe prefers the marijuana to alcohol, and I can maybe see why. Maybe having a little bit before you play is fine, but if you think you're going to go flare up the old water pipe and just get hammered on some Sweet Mary Jane, some AK-47, some Purple Haze, Pineapple Express, you think you're going to go blow through a bunch of that and write good music? You're crazy. You won't be even able to play. And if you can still play after that, you might want to consider giving that up, because you are clearly too far advanced of a user to where it's kind of like you need to understand that you're doing this too much. But now that I kind of get off that high horse, I think a lot of people feel that, maybe if they have some relaxing herbal tea or have a couple beers or spark up a spleeth, that they'll be a little bit more creative. And maybe there's something to that. I really couldn't tell you outside of, having a couple beers. But whatever you got to do to get yourself in a relaxed state of mind to where you're open and creative, hey, do what you got to do. But at the same time, realize there's a fine line between loosening up and just being sloppy to where you're just not relevant anymore. Like, having a couple beers while, songwriting, that's fine. A case, probably not going to get you there, I tend to notice that usually I'm done writing after I've had about my 7th beer, I'm just not playing anymore and I just stop caring. So the more you drink, the less you care and the less productive you'll be. So when it comes to getting in the right state of mind, do what you got to do, but realize it's generally best done in moderation, or your creative spark will fizzle and die very quickly. Something else that I think helps provide some motivation for creativity and some inspiration is, go listen to some live shows on YouTube, or go turn on the American Idol or the Voice or any of these kind of shows where you just have this great performance and it really touches you. That's one of those things where I've noticed, like, I'm not the hugest American Idol fan, but sometimes, like, in the right time, I'll hear some of these performances and they just flat out move me. They are so good. It's just like, wow, this has just really motivated me to want to go and start playing guitar and do something. It's made me want to do something with my life, man. Right? That's kind of ridiculous. Yeah, that 16-year-old girl just sang insert Kelly Clarkson song or Katy Perry song, and it just moved me. Now, it takes a little more than that, but occasionally I do hear songs on these singing shows that are, after I'm done hearing them, I'm just like, okay, let me turn this off and let me get to writing music. But it's crazy what you'll find inspiration in. Sometimes I'll find inspiration after just, listening to some of my favorite artists at a high volume. Sometimes I find inspiration just by, getting on YouTube and watching old concert footage of Rage Against the Machine, and it's just so awesome, especially at the right time of night. But there's a lot of things that we can kind of go back to and fall upon when we need motivation and creative fuel. And I think that music generally helps motivate us to want to do more music. I've personally found that staying active, and not just with my own music, but within the music community as a whole, keeps me motivated. Like, there's other musical related podcasts that I listen to every day on the way to and from work, which is part of the reason why I'm making up this one, because it keeps me motivated at a time when I can't really play music like I would like to. But just staying active and hearing people talk about music, whether it be, audio geekery from recording stuff, or all the way down to just hearing, other podcasts or people talk about what they did and what it took for them to form a band and create the music that they've done, and that the music that I've loved. Hearing that stuff keeps me motivated, because you begin to realize even the guys at the top have the same struggles we do, have the same kind of stuff going on in their lives, that a lot of barriers to what they do, and they get over them, and so can we. But something else that I've also noticed with a lot of other, I'd say more successful musicians is, generally speaking, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, these guys gals did not come up from, let's say, the traditional American working class family with two parents, the Leave It to Beavers. This isn't the Cleavers. They come from broken homes, a lot of kind of more rough environments, and they've got a lot of inspiration just in their childhood. And that's why I think rock music is kind of, and hip hop is usually primarily something that resonates with the youth of today. And I think that it always has. Ever since the 60s, since rock has really been kind of, late 60s, was kind of formed into what it is today. It was protesting wars and just social oppression, and that's kind of been sort of the theme now, and down to the point where people are, writing in their music about how angry they are about having to do homework and that their parents made them go to church when they were 16, Now, I can get why that might bother some people, but, at some point you get 30 or 40, and it's just like, who cares? It just stops mattering. And I think that's why when people get older, they stop, oftentimes really appreciating the more heavy music. But, it's nothing wrong with drawing upon your life experiences to fuel that creative spark. Definitely, I know that I've got a few life experiences that, while I'm happy, I wish they would have never happened, I'm happy to be able to overcome them and, use them as a passion or fuel, writing fuel, and turn something negative into a positive. So, but like I said, you'll notice that a lot of times the people who have some of the most creative energy in their songwriting tend to have the most to say because they've lived certain lives. Not to say that you can't have come up in a nice upper middle class family and had a clean life and not be able to make great music, but just realize that what you're drawing on from creatively and inspiration is going to be different than that person who came up from the broken home with drugs and suicide and death and all that kind of stuff, basically in the hood or anything like that, like some of these gangster rap guys, man, are they believable because that's how they came up. They aren't joking. This is real life. When they say keeping it real, they aren't kidding. So that's why I can kind of see some of the appeal to some of the gangster rap, which is really just like the death metal for hip hop, right? But I can kind of see why that has an appeal for a lot of people. But once again, find whatever inspiration motivates you and whatever you got to do to keep that creative spark going. But realize that while you can't always go back to the same, thing over and over again, you'd be surprised how often times you can do the same thing and get the exact same amount of creative energy. Find what works for you and keep doing it over and over again and until it stops working. And then if it stops working, try something else until you figure out something else that generally works. But I've kind of noticed that pretty good formula for me, at the very least, is have a couple beers, watch some cool, videos on YouTube, or listen to an interview with somebody that motivates you. Just experience nature in some way or whatever it is. Watch a really cool TV movie. And, once you're all amped up, start writing, because that's when you're ready. All right, I think I've kind of beat this one up enough. I don't really have anything else to say, and I think I'm kind of getting to the point where I just don't care anymore. So before I make y'all suffer any longer, I just wanted to thank you a million times over for listening, and I hope to see y'all next time. Thanks.